So 10 years. It's hard to believe. And I'm just taking you all in because if I could dream a world, it would look exactly like this. Thank you all so much for coming. Margot said you came from 20 countries, and I've been crying all day thinking about it and seeing it in action at our investors gathering. Really, the story of Acumen is the story of you. You are our past and our present, and you are our future. And there are so many people I do want to thank. I want to start by thanking our founding partners, not only the Stuart and Roberta and Kate who had the idea with me in the very beginning, but every single one of you who contribute your ideas, your time, your money to making Acumen Fund what it is. I want to thank our incredible board. Our board is so generous that when we told them for our 10th celebration, we didn't want to have a big fundraiser. We wanted to have a party to say thank you, to celebrate what life is really all about. They agreed to underwrite all of the costs of it. And I couldn't ask for a better, more generous board, and completely appreciate it. I also want to give a shout out especially to Margot, our incredible board chair. Margot, over the past 8 years, has become a partner, a mentor, a friend, and a member of my family. And it's been just wonderful, and it will be wonderful. Margot. I want to thank the fellows, past and present, and the alumni. At Acumen Fund, they say that we're like the Hotel California. You can check in and you can never leave. And so it's true. Even if people do go off in new jobs, and it's amazing to see this constellation of people come back and know that they're influencing the world in such incredible ways, we know they're still working on the issues that we care about. And in fact, they're doing it with us, which is really what life is all about. And to the entrepreneurs who are so fearless and intrepid, who made their way to be with us, thank you. I want to thank the chapter leaders, who I'll talk about a little bit later, but who've come from 11 cities across the United States, Canada, Asia, and the Middle East. You're extraordinary. I want to thank my family. There are a lot of us, and they always show up, and it means the world. And I want to thank the family members of all of the Acumen Fund team, because I know how much you sacrifice, and I know how much you give, and you are all part of us as well. I'd actually like to ask the Acumen Fund team to stand up, but because of the board, we were able to bring everyone together from the 8 countries in which we work around the world. So would you guys just stand up for a second to be honored? You are wicked smart, incredibly competent, and you are also kind and gracious and generous, and you are the people who enable us to cultivate what we honor, and I couldn't feel more privileged to work with you. So thank you. Thank you to the friends who go way beyond the call of duty and showing up for Acumen Fund all of the time. The Persian poet Hafiz writes that even after all this time, the sun never says to the earth, "You owe me." Look what happens with a love like that. It lights the whole sky. Thank you, every single one of you who came to be here to celebrate our 10th anniversary with Acumen Fund, for lighting the whole sky. When I go back to the beginnings of Acumen Fund, as you saw in the video, they were rather inauspicious, to say the least. We actually had no roadmap. We had no path. We didn't know exactly what we were doing. We knew that markets alone weren't going to solve problems of poverty, nor were traditional top-down approaches to aid, and we wanted to carve a new path. And so we did what my mentor, John Gardner, would tell us to do: start and let the work teach you. teach us. But it wasn't without its stumbles. In the first summer, we looked at 700 organizations, trying to find which ones would pass our tests of a leader with vision who had a business plan that was focused specifically on the poor, of a business that we believed that could scale, which was for us reaching at least 1 million people, and a business that could become sustainable, which was to cover costs. And we found exactly 0, which was kind of a bummer. And then we stumbled again. Our first investment was in a digital hearing aid, which did reach 10,000 people, but there was clearly no clear path to scale, no trajectory to scale. And so we talked to our partners and we told them that we had a failure. And what we found was this great enthusiasm, because so few people actually talk about failure. And we learned from that, not only that this would become part of our culture, but that we would also share failure, move forward without it. The good news in that early period was that I also got to know a man named Dr. Venkataswamy, an Acumen Fund, invested in the Aravind Eye Clinic, eye hospital that reaches 1 million people every year. And we invested in a telemedicine project that would extend eye care from high-quality doctors in the cities of India to low-income people living in the far-flung rural villages. And that telemedicine project has now reached over 800,000 people and created a new model for India. But more important, in many ways, Dr. Venkataswamy completely influenced who we would become. He taught us to see beauty and joy in what we did, especially when it came from the poor, when we were working with the poor. And so when I think back to those early days and how they made us who we are, it becomes in some ways even harder to believe that 10 years later, we've been able to show that patient capital works. 10 years later, Acumen Fund has invested $72 million in 65 companies in South Asia and Africa that are delivering critical services: water, healthcare, housing, energy, agricultural inputs, and most recently education, to 86 million people, which is a population the size of Germany. 10 years later, these companies have created over 55,000 jobs. And if you do some elementary math with really conservative assumptions and assume $2 a day per job, that comes out to about $30 million that are injected into the company, into the communities in which these individuals work. 10 years later, we've seen 5 industries significantly changed, enhanced, extended to the poor. Industries like water, ambulances, long-lasting bed nets, toilets, and drip irrigation. We've seen policies and partnerships that are changing the game for how you deliver services to the poor. And 5 years ago, when we started investing in leaders, we're starting to see this constellation of leaders in our alumni, in our fellows, who, as I said, are really architects of the new social sector. 10 years ago, we were pretty lonely in a field that didn't have any other real players. And it's been unbelievable to see where we are today, where there are 200 organizations that count themselves social impact investing funds. And it's from my partner and colleague Brian Trelstad's leadership as an architect with colleagues across the field in creating real structures, real metrics that are being used by 60 organizations, an association that is allowing us to name a field and providing a different way forward. So patient capital works, but when we first started, we had a lot of naysayers who kept asking us the same questions over and over again, and there were 3 big ones. The first one was, will these individual companies ever scale? And right now, 7 of those companies reach at least 1 million people. The second was, would they ever become sustainable? And at least today, 10 are profitable, which is great news. The companies have raised an additional $250 million into their own operations on top of our investments, and we believe that all are on their way. And the third one was, would we ever get our money back? And one thing we learned is that our patient capital has to be more patient than we thought it would at the beginning. But we are seeing money come back. we've seen about $7 million returned to Acumen Fund so far. And that means $7 million that we can reinvest in new innovations that serve the poor. So we would say defiantly that patient capital works. And now we're finding ourselves drawn into the conversations that we're seeing across society today around capitalism, around government's role, around the corporation's role. New paradigms are emerging, and we're part of those conversations. So I just want to give you a few examples of patient capital at work. Many of you remember us talking about the bed net factory for many years, since 2002. But 29 million bed nets a year later, 7,000 jobs, a model company in Africa, we've learned a lot about malaria. That allowed us to understand that there are many people who don't want to use bed nets or who can't use bed nets. And so a while back, we invested in a wall lining that individuals could put around their houses. And they're still in clinical trials, but in the preference trials that are going on in Kenya and Mali, the preference rates that we're seeing among low-income people are incredible. This may be the next great disruption in the malaria market. WHI, today at our investor gather, Sanjay Bhatnagar, talked about this company which Susan Meiselas and Chris Anderson and I visited in 2005 when there was a single plant. Today there are 480 plants that operate across India, bringing clean drinking water to an access area of about 4 million people. And I learned through WHI that sometimes a single successful company could spawn an entire industry. And now there are 5 companies doing this in India, and WHI is extending its services to Bangladesh and to West Africa. And again, it's this theme of learning why we do the work we do at Acumen Fund. Not only did we learn, but Pharmagen, our water company in Pakistan, saw the insight that low-income people were willing to pay to get the water delivered as much as they were willing to pay for the water itself. And so now 70% of the 100,000 liters of clean water sold by Pharmagen into the slums of Lahore, Pakistan, are delivered to individuals' houses. D-Light was a more recent investment started by 2 Stanford grads, bringing forth what they thought was a great deal, a $34 solar light to low-income people. And while people loved the light, they wouldn't pay for it. And so they iterated and reiterated and finally got the price down to $8. And now they've brought light to over 3.5 million people. And again, from there, we learned in working in energy that people want to turn a switch on. They don't just want a light to hold in their hands. And so Acumen Fund has made investments in 5 microgrid operations in India, Pakistan, and Kenya. And we're starting to learn a great deal around how that works. We invested in an ambulance company in India when they had 10 ambulances. And today, Zakitsa Emergency Services now operates 660 ambulances, has 3,500 employees, and this year served 500,000 people across India. Again, our partner, Aman Foundation in Pakistan, saw this model, decided to bring it into Pakistan, and they also have served over 100,000 people in Karachi. These investments are changing the game of the way that businesses are bringing services to low-income people. A couple of years ago, we decided to go into agriculture with supports from the Gates Foundation. I want to talk quickly about 3 because this is an area to watch. Almost a billion people on the planet are smallholder farmers and live in poverty. And so if you can increase their productivity, you can really make change. So you look at a place like this, Gulu in northern Uganda, a place that had been decimated by the Lord's Resistance Army. And an entrepreneur, Bruce Robertson from South Africa, came in with a cotton gin, and now 50,000 people who'd been living for 20 years as displaced persons are coming back, and despite the fact that they've essentially been de-skilled, are earning significant livelihoods selling their cotton to the cotton gin. Western Seeds is selling hybrid seeds to increase farm productivity across Western Kenya, and they've just, in this recent year, sold to over 300,000 smallholder farmers. And Jasser Farms in Pakistan is bringing artificial insemination to the dairy milk industry, and we're seeing doubling and tripling of milk productivity. When you imagine that there are 35 million smallholder dairy farmers with 2 or 3 cows, and think about what this could do, you can suddenly start again to see social and economic transformation. So patient capital works, and we're just getting started. I could go on for days and days and days about the lessons that we've learned, both good and bad, but I'm going to keep it to just 3. And the first is that this kind of work needs to be philanthropic at the beginning. It needs to be backed by philanthropy. And the reason is because people always ask me, so why aren't you a for-profit? You tell us all these great success stories. We did have a very long session on our failures yesterday as well. It's a part of the deal. If you think about it, we are backing entrepreneurs who are daring to go into markets that have completely failed the poor forever, and so has government. And so not only are entrepreneurs having to fight no infrastructure, high levels of corruption, but also extremely low levels of trust from people who've seen too many projects come and go. In many ways, our risk is very high, the financial returns are often low. Acumen Fund wants to think first and foremost about the people we're serving, the impact we're making, and then we want to make sure that our companies are sustainable. The second big insight is that local institutions matter. When I first went to Pakistan in 2002, I was lucky to meet Syed Babar Ali, one of the great businessmen in the country, and he said, you know, we've seen so many people like you come and go. And if you're serious about doing this work, not only do you have to show up, but keep your head down. Make sure you do the work before you start bragging about it. And then bring people into the community. Well, we took that advice, and 10 years later, 45 Pakistanis give money to Acumen Fund for the work we're doing in Pakistan. There's a vibrant community. There's a strong local team. There are advisors, and we have 3 with us here tonight who've traveled to be with us, who help us on every matter, not just in Pakistan, but also global. Together, we're building probably the most important commodity on this planet, and that is trust. And we certainly need more than that. But it also allows us to move quickly. So when some of our companies go into turnaround situations, the community can rally and change the direction. And related to that is the third piece, which is that while critical, business solutions are not enough. We didn't start Acumen Fund to show that you could go into low-income markets and make money too. We started Acumen Fund because we want to help build a world beyond poverty. And if we're going to do that, we need to recognize that we have to build viable businesses, but we also need to change the system, change ideas, build leadership. And I want to talk first about leadership. Everywhere you go in the world today, all you hear people talking about is our crisis of leadership. And you think about it, just in this last year, the financial crisis, the Eurozone, the Arab Spring, Occupy Wall Street. You think about the unproductive, uncivil discourse of our politicians, not just in this country, but in countries around the world. People talk about corruption, but how many are doing something about it? They decry injustice, but where are the experiments to create a more just world? And if ever there were a time to renew and restructure our systems of government and of capitalism, it's now. And so, at Acumen Fund, we care about leadership, we care about values, and we talk about what that means. So we say, yes, be audacious, but have humility. Yes, be accountable, but be generous. Yes, be a leader, but as Sarah Kay says, listen. 5 years ago, we started the Acumen Fund Global Fellows Program with this idea that we could create a global core of extraordinary leaders around the world and that they would help become architects of the social sector. And we're starting to see the fruits of that investment already in people like Javad Aslam, who you met, Pakistani-American who went to Pakistan. And not only did he build one of the first successful affordable housing companies for the poor, but he did so without ever bowing to corruption. And in so doing, earned himself a reputation as someone you didn't want to mess with. And now, Javad is helping to shape the future of low-income housing in Pakistan. Or I think about Suraj Sudhakar, who some of you met earlier today, who I believe is going to be one of the bridge people in our world who will make sure that the voices of the poor are sitting at tables where people are talking about poverty. Suraj worked for a year in Kenya with toilets. And in so doing, he met a group of young men in the Nairobi slums and became an incredible organizer. And together with those young men, Suraj and they have run over 40 TEDx's in the slums of Nairobi for young and old people who were tired of seeing workshops just on HIV and microfinance. And it's changing the way people see themselves, and it's changing the way others see them too. Suraj is now running Acumen Fund's East Africa Fellows Program. I think of Chika Fujita, and the Tokyo Foundation should be very proud. Japanese young woman who worked for a year in Bombay with ambulances. I got an email from her 2 days ago to tell me that she had just accepted a job with D-Light, the solar company, to take their operations into Afghanistan. And so, alone, she's moving to Kabul in the next 10 days. Or Catherine Casey, who spent a year working in the slums of Nairobi, learning about health franchising, who last January smiled when we put her on a plane with a one-way ticket and told her to build our office in Ghana for West Africa. And 10 months later, she's come back to be with us, but she's going back in a couple of weeks. After having built an office, found some of the best advisors in West Africa, created a tremendous team already, and identified and made 2 really exciting strategic investments. And so we are operational and we are on our way. This is the promise of investing in this next generation that is so extraordinary. And when our local advisors saw what we were doing on the global level, they said, come, build this so it's deeper inside our countries where there are these equal fault lines. And so with support of the Kenya Commercial Bank, last year we launched our first regional fellows program for East Africa. And there are 19 young East Africans in this program, and they include individuals who have Oxford and Harvard Business School degrees, and also individuals who grew up and still work in the slums. And you can see the discourse and the dialogue evolving among these young people. They will stand as role models. And next year, with support from JS Bank, Ali Siddiqui, one of our global board members, we are taking the regional program into Pakistan. And you can start to see this moving and changing. And we will have a fellows program in every one of our regional offices. So you start to see these concentric circles around investment and fellows and regional fellows. And then beyond that is this phenomenon that I am unbelievably excited about of the chapters. Young professionals, investment bankers, creatives, people working in all kinds of industries that want to belong to something bigger than themselves, that want to support this idea, this philosophy of patient capital, understanding it's not only a way to invest, but it's a way to be a moral leader. And so there are now 11 chapters around the world, from San Francisco, Atlanta, Chicago, New York City, Washington, D.C., Vancouver, Toronto, Dubai, London, Tokyo, Karachi. They are beautiful. And they, too, are just getting started. And so when I think about how all of this is evolving, I think to myself that maybe the real story of Acumen Fund is a story of community, and that our community can do so much to change the world. To paraphrase Archimedes, give me a place to stand, and we will give us a place to stand, and we will move the earth. So if our last chapter was about proving that patient capital works and putting it on the map, our next chapter is taking the idea mainstream, and our ambitions are big. We see scale for Acumen itself on 2 levels. One is by moving geographically and also strengthening our portfolio. And we are in 8 countries now. We intend to be in 15 countries by 2015, increasing our portfolio of investments from $70 to $150 million. And at the same time, we want to increase the fellows in our universe to 400 local and regional fellows, and to go from 11 to 40 chapters around the world, all the time spreading these ideas about a new kind of capitalism, a new way of solving poverty, a new way of building systems where everyone can see themselves, and we couldn't be more excited. But as we grow, no matter how fast, we know that if we don't recognize and respect the ultimate customers who we're serving, it will be all for naught. And the most exciting thing, and you can hear it when Dr. Bajwa talked about it, and you can hear it this afternoon, earlier tonight, about going and seeing this work in the field. We get to meet some pretty extraordinary people. I think about Elia Rahemu, who I met when he was a bag of skin and bones, pitch-patch jeans, and over the years saw that with a single bed net, his health improved to a place where he could earn income, and for the first time in his life buy himself a mattress, and at age 66, finally not have to sleep on mud, but have a mattress on which he could lay his head. I think about Rajan, a man who will forever remind me of my father with his hazel eyes and his enormous hands, who I met in the Thar Desert of Pakistan, who with a single strip irrigation system was able to earn enough income to send his grandchildren to school for the first time in 3 generations. I think of the beautiful Jane, an ex-prostitute, HIV positive, who could never get a mortgage from a traditional bank. But because she proved herself as a good credit risk with our partner, Jami Bora, by building trust, by showing she was capable, she was able finally to buy herself a home where she, for the first time, had a bathroom and a kitchen and a garden. And I think of the young men who worked with Suraj and started the Blue Sweater Club in the slums of Nairobi. And I get texts almost weekly from the young men in the club. In fact, this morning, Alex Sanguti sent me a text wishing me good luck on my speech tonight and sends his regards to everyone in his community, the Acumen Fund community, because he, too, he says, wants to be part of bridging the gap between rich and poor. Another one of the members of this club is a young man named Chris McCow. And our advisor, Duncan Onyango, who flew here from Nairobi today, hired Chris when he was working selling eggs in the streets for $30 a month to be an intern at his consulting company. And now not only is Chris an analyst at the company, but he's at college where he'll earn his degree. And trust me, this young man will run one day a company of his own. The young men in the Blue Sweater Club are right. Every one of us needs to be part of bridging the gap between rich and poor. I feel so lucky to know people like that and to have adventures with people like Dr. Bajwa. And inspired by you, Bajwa, I thought I would share one story because I don't only go into villages and dance in the heat at weddings, although I love it. The last time Dr. Bajwa and I went to Bahawalpur, which is this place where his extraordinary vision, his organization, converted a nonprofit microfinance organization into a commercial agricultural bank for low-income farmers, is known as a difficult place. It is a very feudal place. The extremes in wealth and poverty are enormous. And it is a place known for as an epicenter of extremist madrasas. And so here we went and sat on a day, and it's also really hot, it was probably 118 degrees, with about 20 farmers. And we talked to these farmers about their lives, about credit, about how the bank had changed them or not. And it was fascinating because the farmers said they loved the credit. They didn't have to pay the middlemen anymore. They saw productivity rise. They were able to buy new land. But they also talked about how, for the first time in their lives, they too had a bank that was just like the banks where the rich people went. At NRSP, they were counted. They were seen. And what I took from that is that patient capital, for all that we care about the metrics of productivity, income, and anything else we can count, is also a human story. Patient capital for the farmers is a story of themselves wanting to be a part of all of us. And so at the end of this conversation, I asked the farmers, what would they do if they were president of Pakistan? And as you can imagine, after a few minutes of sustained laughter at the very idea of this, one of the younger farmers, this very handsome, elegant, turbaned, suntanned man named Ramzan, said, well, madam, I think I would do three things. I would focus on inflation because inflation rates are so high that poor people can't afford food for their family. I would focus on electricity because there's so little of it in this area and we could do more if we had it. And third, we have very poor petroleum distribution and public transport depends on it, and the farmers depend on the public transport to get their goods to market. He never talked about the war on terror. He never talked about handouts. He essentially said, we want government to do the right thing to make markets work, and we want markets to be more accessible to us. Then you can let us take care of the rest. And I think this is really the story. And indeed, it's conversations and stories like this that remind me why we do this work. At Acumen Fund, we believe in dignity. At Acumen, we believe that every one of us essentially wants the same thing, and that each of us needs to do what we can do to extend the fundamental principle that all men are created equal to every human being on the planet. And when I think about the future of Acumen Fund, not in 10 years, but maybe 30 or even 50, my dream is that the world will say there was this group of people who tried to do everything they could to make change in the world, but that they understood they couldn't do it themselves. And so they brought a lot of other people with them, and in so doing, did more than anyone could ever imagine. I dream that our grandchildren will say that there was this big, important idea called patient capital, and that it was a way of using tools of business to solve problems of poverty, and that the people who experimented with it were part of creating new economic systems in which we controlled capital and not the other way around. I dream that those grandchildren of ours will see that we acted on our belief that it's entrepreneurs, crazy, restless entrepreneurs who see big problems as amazing opportunities to solve, and that we help them release their own creative energies, understanding that it can take time and not stopping until they did. And I dream, most of all, that our grandchildren will understand, as we do, that to truly heal the world, we need to start by recognizing that every single one of us has a story, and that behind those stories are these extraordinary faces, and that it's only when we care about the stories and the faces of all the people across this extraordinary planet of ours, regardless of nationality, of race, of creed, or class, that we can even begin to hope that we can build a world beyond poverty. One of my favorite poets is the great Irish poet Seamus Heaney, who writes that there are times when hope and history rhyme. And I believe that we are living in one of those moments. Never in history have we had the tools, the imagination, the resources to solve all the big problems of the world that we do right now. Never before in history have we been able to see each other and know each other all across the planet. And in times of cynicism and despair, there's probably no greater change, no greater thing to hold on to than hope. And I think that that's something that Acumen Fund is in a really great position to give, but not a soft, treacly, facile hope, a hard-earned, hard-edged hope that comes from having the courage to experiment and fail, fall down, get up again, and do it until we get things right. And you have our commitment that we are going to continue to do that. And each of you give us hope that we will go into the future together. And so I would ask all of you to raise your glasses, to toast to the last 10 years of Acumen Fund, to look forward to the next 10 years, to make a commitment to each other and to ourselves that we will do what we can to light up the world anew. We can only do it together, and I know that we can make it true. And lastly, I just want to say to each and every one of you, thank you again. Thank you. I'm not finished. Thank you for giving Acumen Fund all that you give us, for truly, I think more than anything else, every day that we are here with these dreams, you teach us what love is. And I truly believe that we are a group of people that can change the world. And if not us, who? So here's to the next 10. Thank you.